I'm very excited to have Branda Anderson with us. She is one of our veteran presenters, and some of you might have seen or heard her before. Branda is a world history and social studies teacher at Kamiak High School in Mukilteo, and she has participated in countless teacher trainings on the Holocaust. She's a fellow with the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, a Powell Fellow with our Holocaust Center for Humanity, a Defiant Requiem Teacher Ambassador, and a Museum Fellow with the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. She also has a Master's in Holocaust and Genocide Studies from Gratz College. And Branda serves on the Holocaust Center's Educators for Change, and she's a representative on our board of directors. We are grateful for her commitment and constant desire to learn more and always share what she's learning. So you're lucky to get to hear from Branda today. So Branda, I don't want to take any time away from you. With that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alana, for that glowing introduction. Every time you do that, I feel like a little bit overwhelmed. So thank you for that. I was just scrolling the chat and seeing how many people from all over the state and region are here. And I think that's amazing. I'm so excited to see the reach from the different districts and to see some friendly faces and people that I know and to see faces I've never seen, which means this is new. And I like that. I'm excited to be here. I'm thankful for the center for the opportunity to do this. Today, I'm gonna be doing a lesson plan that could be used in your classroom. I would say tomorrow, but I hope you're not teaching tomorrow. The next time you want to use it. I, as a teacher, like coming to these kind of events and getting stuff that's really usable right away. Knowing that we all have to adapt for our population, our age group, our ability levels, all those different things. But I think the ones that are the most usable right away are the most helpful to get into our classrooms. So today we're going to be dealing with immigration and the Holocaust. Oh, Kent, you guys are from everywhere. So I'm just going to jump right in. Like Alana said, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to address them. I have a limited time. Alana knows that I like to try to cheat that time, but I can't today. So I'm going to do my best to stay on it. So we're going to be looking, like I said, today at immigration and the Holocaust. And I think one of the reasons I really like this lesson is because in any classroom right now, immigration is still a big question. It's a very pertinent question in our dialogue in our classrooms. And I think this can be used in a world history class. I think this can be used in the US history class. I think this can be used in an ELA class with lit if need be as well. So I think it's a very good lesson. It comes from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They have updated this lesson, and I'll give you the link to the update as well. So you have two choices, and when I get to the end, I'll explain why I chose to present on this one and not the other one. The other one is amazing. Don't get me wrong on that. I also wanted to say, I'm impressed that you're here on the day that it's going to be the least hot this week. I saw this morning, I live in Woodinville, and that it's supposed to be 91 today. And I got real excited because that was a cool off. And I thought, what is wrong? What is going on in my world right now? That 91 feels like a reprieve. So thank you all for being here. And I hope you're staying hydrated and as cool as possible. So before I jump too far into the lesson, I would like to go over briefly, and I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this, the USHMM, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, guidelines for teaching. These are also the guidelines from our center and on our state. Our state has we've added one for our state, but these 10+1 make up our state guidelines as well for best practices in teaching. And I'm not gonna read them all to you because you can read and you can find these, but these are important for any educator when we're bringing the Holocaust into our classroom, that we keep kind of grounded in these best practices. I know that Paul's doing a lot of work in districts and schools throughout the state to help teachers get grounded in these. These help us keep our study of the Holocaust grounded and moving forward. I think it's really important. Today's lesson will focus on these three guidelines, hitting these three guidelines. It's gonna talk about avoiding simple answers to complex questions. It's going to contextualize the history, and it's going to translate statistics into people. We're going to hear the voice of a survivor in it. And so that's where this would fall in the best practices. So the question, I get two questions when I work with my students. And just so you know, the levels I teach at, I teach sophomore world history. So I teach the Holocaust in the framework of world history. I also teach senior social studies. In particular, I teach a class called Holocaust Genocide Studies, an elective for seniors. So those are the two groups I work with, sophomores and seniors. Obviously, the senior class is a lot more in depth because it's a whole course on the Holocaust and genocide. But the two questions that come out of both classes without fail every year. One is why the Jews, which is a whole different presentation, but I can give that when Alana wants me to again. So they want to know why the Jews. So we spent a lot of time on the history of anti-Semitism. I think that's important. The second question I get from a lot of students and have gotten in the 18 years of teaching this is, why didn't people just leave? And that is one of those questions that you could give a simple answer, but it's actually a really complex question. And that's what this lesson will deal with today. And hopefully it'll be something you can use in your classroom to deal with that question. I think it's an important one too, because again, it pulls forward to the issues with immigration and refugees that we have in our world today. So first, I want you as participants, if you could, to think about what would cause you to leave your home country for good, to never return. So maybe some of you have experienced this. I don't know everybody's story in the room, but what would it be? What would it take to make you leave? Now, my idea for students is I usually have them journal about this and then pair share, and then share out to the group. If you will just drop in the chat, I want us interacting. You don't just need me all the time. What would it take for you to leave the country you've resided in, you were born in, your family's in? What would it take to get you to leave forever? So go ahead and drop that in the chat. I'm going to see if I can see what your answers are. So think through, take a second. I know I just asked you a big question. So what would it take? Danger, safety, lack of opportunities, unsafe for my children. That's a great one. Yeah, absolutely. For those of us that have children, that can be a very big one. Family danger, safety, no means of support. Yeah, a lot of the same stuff here. It's interesting because you're writing from an adult perspective. The students come up with different answers, which I always think is super intriguing. They think less about opportunity, they think about safety a lot. Religious persecution, government pushing hate and violence, consistent political hysteria. So good. So you can see that it would have to be something big. And this is with my students. I always let them share out and we kind of talk about the different things. And then I ask them to consider the fact that leaving the country is a big thing. It takes a lot to push people out of their country. In the Declaration of Independence, the framers actually wrote about the idea that most humans will suffer for a long time rather than change what is causing them to suffer, that we'll put up with a lot. So to think about what it would take to uproot your family is a big deal. And I want the students in that framework when we start, because they live in a digital age where the idea of flying somewhere is relatively straightforward for a lot of students. Again, that's also going to depend on your demographic. If you are teaching in a more a heavier immigrant population, that may have a very different response, which is also very interesting. And if you have, depending on the socioeconomic status of your students and their personal experiences, all of those will influence how they answer this question. So we're going to do, I like giving you digital resources. You've probably used this if you've been living like I have in the digital world for more than a year. You've used a lot of resources. I like Menti. We're going to use that today. Now, Alana, I don't know if somebody already has dropped the resource file into the chat so people can have access to all the documents.
Yep, I'll do that now. Hold on one second. You'll see it there in a minute.
So Alana's going to drop a file with a bunch of PDFs for you. If we were in person, I'd have handouts, but as close as we got. So these are the PDFs. So if you can open those and have those in front of you, because we're going to work through them as much as we possibly can today. The first one you would hand out to your students, and I give to my students, is the one you can kind of see very small on my slide. And it's small because I knew that we were going to give you a link to it, so I didn't feel like taking up too much of my slide. And it says, why didn't they just leave? So one of the things we would do at this point with my students is, and I have it here as my ideas, I would have them either in pairs or small groups work together to come up with a list and then share out. We can't do that because you're not together. So we're going to use Menti. So what I want you to think through, and I did have a kid this year, we were doing this digitally, say, can we just Google it? No. I want you to brainstorm. what documents or paperwork you would need to immigrate from the United States. Not vacation. I always clarify that with my students. It's not you're going to, you know, El Salvador for vacation or visit some family. You're leaving forever. You're giving up your citizenship or moving on. You're trying to get out. You want to immigrate to the United States. So let me stop this share really quick and give you, oops, there we go, the Menti. So if you've not used Menti, it's one of my favorites. You can either do it, if you don't, you can actually do it on your phone if you've got a phone by you or your iPad or your other digital device. But you can also do it from your computer. You just need to type in this, go to menti.com as it says up here and type in this code, and it'll give you a chance to respond to the question of what paperwork or documents do you think you would need to leave the United States forever. And if you could just drop in there and just start dropping some ideas. Let me make sure it's working on my phone. Let's see if we're running tech problems. You can also drop in the chat. Thank you. Is the Menti working for people? Oh, there we go. Yay. Birth certificate, passport, birth certificate, yeah. Passports, as you're keep typing in, I'm just going to kind of chat over you because I'm a teacher. Passport's always an interesting one because a lot of students where I teach don't have passports. More don't have it than do. Some do, but not all. Passport, or visa, birth certificates, financial records, vaccinations. Not just COVID vaccinations, I wrote when I was prepping for this. I mean, those would be important too right now more than ever, but permission to be received. Work visas, medical records. Yeah, medical records is a big one. Entrance documents to the destination. Yeah. And it's interesting, again, as adults, you're probably coming out of your own life experiences, working with students, working with people you know. Sometimes the students really struggle to think about, like, I don't think anybody's, oh yeah, marriage certificate if you're married, divorce certificate if you were divorced to prove that you were actually legally separated from a person. Does anybody put, well, I haven't, just a couple more seconds. I haven't seen police record. Proof that you're not criminal on the fly. Yeah. So you'd need, thank you. You guys are awesome. Thanks for playing the Menti game with me. We'll come back to this, but you would need a lot of documents. Okay. Now for serious cash. Yes, I like, that's a good one. I like the addition of the serious cash there at the end. That's a great statement. You would need money. You would need some sort of money to be able to get to these places. And so if you were looking to leave, you'd have to get these documents. With students, depending on the age of your students you're working at, it's fun to ask them, where do you get those documents? Do they know at this age? I was actually born in Spokane. I grew up in Alaska, ended up back here. Anyway, I remember my parents having to get my birth certificate, and it was kind of a hard thing to do. It's not crazy easy to get a certified copy of your birth certificate because you're working with the government, right? And governments traditionally move very slow, bureaucracy. And so getting the kids thinking about what it would take to leave. The next question will, of course, be very similar on the same Menti. And again, I would do this after after we go over the first slide. I would say, okay, so what would another country want from you to get into their country? Like, what would you need to be able to show to another country that it's okay for you to come live there? And so get the Menti back up on that. And hopefully that one came up for you. It's a lot harder to do without my multiple screens at school. I will say that for sure. So what would another country want from you to say that it's okay for you to come in. Money, yes. Proof of employment, yeah, they might want proof of employment. Very good, I like that one. Vaccine records, yeah. And I think what would a bunch of you are putting that, I think would be interesting about that right now in particular is the idea that students are more aware of vaccines right now. They might actually come up with that construct a little bit easier. School records, yeah, absolutely. You got to be able to prove that your education, medical records, financial stability, having housing lined up. These are all, again, it is interesting because again, these are all coming from spaces of adults where references, maybe medical exams, citizenship status, police records, absolutely. Debts resolved, that's a good one. I don't generally see that one. Yeah. Again, you're seeing a lot of the FBI clearance. Wow, yeah. Employment, maybe possible evidence of relatives in the country. Some of you are more aware based on your own personal experience or maybe the experience of your students or family members that how hard it is to get into our country, even as a refugee, much less as just an immigrant. And so the amount of documentations. Proof that you're in line with the country's views and willingness to accept apply. Yeah, that's a really great point. Some countries would want you to sort of identify a sponsor. Yeah, absolutely. Tons of documents. You guys are nailing it. Thank you so much. You're all nailing it. At this point, I would talk to the students. I'm looking at this. Oh yeah. About how do you get those documents? Again, that same thing, like how do you compile all of that? And if you're a large family, it's one thing if I by myself am trying to get my stuff together. So I was born in Spokane, I live here now. My son was born here. My wife was born in Colorado. Like we have to do all these things and compiling all those documents be incredibly difficult. And this is when my students go, I just Google it. Well, no, let's go back to the 1930s. If you're in Germany in the 1930s during the Great Depression, contextualizing the space, your families lived in Germany for generations. Your whole family's in Germany. You don't have family other places, and you have to get those documents. What does that even look like? How do you, if you want to go to another country in the 1930s, how do you get those? Even the list of what they want, you've got to go to the consulate if that country has a consulate in Germany. So you got to go physically to that, probably in Berlin, okay, right? And then, yeah, tons of documents translated and certified by government institutions. Yeah, absolutely. And kids now they can Google Translate, right? They could go, if maybe they want to go to Poland, which is a beautiful country, and they want to live in Poland, they can go to the Polish national website and have it translated into English and start navigating it. But that wasn't a thing. It's important for our students to understand that anybody in Germany wanting to leave in the 1930s would have had to write a letter to the US consulate and then write a letter to the US government. And I did some research on like how long that process would take, and reminding our students, letters are not emails. I say letters and they get very confused. They're not emails, they travel by steamboat at the time. So wherever you are in Germany, you put it in the mailbox that has to go from your town to a port, right? Then it's got to get on a steamship, it's got to get across, it's got to go from the steamship to where you want it to go. And then there's just government bureaucracy, which we all know takes forever, especially as teachers. Yes, have you ever tried to recertify? It's not fun. And so getting students to kind of understand, again, this is breaking this into, it's not a simple thing as I just want to go to the United States, or I just want to go, I saw someone say Brazil, so that just stuck in my head, or I want to go to Shanghai. There's a lot of process you have to go through. And that's where we start this on that sheet. And so just as a quick overview, this is just me being, again, context oriented as a history teacher. I'd like for my students to understand, and usually we've already done a lesson on pre-war Jewish life in Germany and in Europe, so they have an understanding, but I always think it's important to remind the students the Jewish community in Germany, because we're specifically talking about Germany. And I always tell students, once the war starts, it's a whole different thing. Getting out of Europe during the war is nearly impossible. It's gone, right? So we're talking 33 to bumping into 39, Okay, and I try to kind of ground them in the time. Some of you were in the first session, and I know that they talked about the timeline lesson from USHMM. That's a great one. It's good to remind them where you are on the timeline. How this is where we are, because after the war starts, it's a whole different ballgame. And I like to remind my students that Jews had lived in Germany since the Middle Ages. They were embedded in German culture. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years. They weren't necessarily a new people group, a religious group in Germany. I believe, and I could, Alana or Paul, you could correct me. I believe they predate. I know they predate. Let me say, I know they predate the split between Catholicism and Lutheranism. They predate the Reformation. So we're talking generational experience. It wasn't until the 19th century that that Jews in Germany were given the same rights as Christian Germans. Remember that Germany is a relatively young country, as a sense. It unites under in the late 1900s, so it's relatively new as a formed state. By 1933, when the Nazis come to power, German Jews were well integrated and even assimilated into German culture. That looks very different in Poland and Lithuania and other places in Eastern Europe. And that's a different conversation for when the war starts. German Jews still maintain a discernible identity and culture, but that for Jews in Germany, that was a religious culture, not a genetic race kind of culture. It was just in the same way Lutherans or Catholics in the country would have maintained their religious identity and culture. In 1933, the Jewish population in Germany was about 525,000, which sounds like a lot, but it's less than 1% of the population in Germany. And I think that's an important statistic for our students. Less than 1% of the population in Germany would identify as Jewish. I compare it so that the kids can kind of have some comparison points. In the United States, about 12%, according to our census. So not the most recent one, because that data is not completely out, but the last census, 12% of the United States identifies as Black. 16% roughly, that number is a little fuzzy because they keep taking that term off, identify as Latin American or Hispanic. American indigenous or Alaska indigenous and indigenous tribes throughout our country is about 0.9%. So just so they have some framework of what the population looked like. About 400,000 of the Jews in Germany held German citizenship. Many of them their families have been there for centuries. About 100,000 Jews at the time the Nazis came to power did not have German citizenship. Most of them had immigrated to Germany over the recent decades, mostly from the East. That 400,000 were citizens, spoke German as their primary language. They identified as German. The 100,000, mostly of the 100,000 immigrant population over the last couple decades before this, spoke primarily Yiddish, but also spoke German. Jews in Germany shared a religious cultural identity. Many Jews rarely, if never, attended the synagogue. There were religious communities where people were active, but it's nothing compared to, say, when you get into the East and Poland and places like that. Most still continued to celebrate Jewish holidays and cultural experiences, and there was a minority of strictly observant Jews throughout Germany, a small minority, again, comparative to other countries, very small. And most Jews identified themselves as Jews as a religious group. German nationality, religiously Jewish. And so I like to give that framework for our students. All right, so in the packet of documents you got in the file link from Alana, there's a handout that's, is there a question? Okay. Did German Jews identify as a unique ethnic group within Germany? I hear different things about Jews identifying ethnically around the world. Now, Alana or Paul, step in on this. As far as I've read, up to 1933, it was identified not as a religious group, and that could be an ethnic group. I don't want to misstate that. It depends on your definition of an ethnic group.
Yeah, I would say it's gray area. Like
Mhm.
there's no great definition or delineation here. Yes, they identified as a unique ethnic group. However, they were also very assimilated and intermarried. So it was very gray.
Yeah, I think of it. Yeah, identified nationally as German, like,
Yeah.
and then maybe culturally as yeah. Okay, yeah. I didn't want
Yeah,
to
it didn't
put a
it didn't conflict. Like
yeah
being German didn't conflict with being Jewish.
any more than being Catholic or being Lutheran, which are very
Right.
different at odds with each other. Same, yeah. Great question. Sorry, I just happened to see that one. So in your handouts, there's a document that looks at documents you would need for immigration. I'm going to stop my share and find it for you. Yes, there it is. It should look like, there it is, this. There's a handout here. What I'd like you to do, I'll give you about a minute just to skim over this. If we're in class, I would have students read independently and annotate. I'm big on my students annotating. I want them to write on documents and engage, and that's why this year was so hard for me. But annotate it, since that's hard for you to do. I'd like you to read it. And what I'm looking for you to find on this document, pardon me, is, and then share in the chat as it comes up, 3 things you think would be like the hardest, 3 items on the list you think would be the most difficult to obtain for immigration. I shouldn't say either. So look over the document and then jump in the chat and throw down 3 things that you think would be the most difficult. Oops. Right. Take a second, read through the document for immigration. And this also, as you're reading and I'm talking over you, would be a great time for definitions depending on the level of your students. If you could do a definitional breakdown on immigration versus immigration. Yeah. So this is what you would need to leave the German Reich after 1937. So what would be, do you think, 1 to 3 of the, you can, you don't have to follow the rules exactly, most difficult things to get? Lenore, I agree with you. It's nationality is different than ethnicity, and there are overlapping aspects of identity. Yeah, tax requirements. The itemized, yeah, that one, Emily, you've pointed out submission of an itemized list of gifts made to third parties since 1931. Like, I don't know who I gave stuff to yesterday. That's it. That is always one that sticks out to me. Yeah. Unless you never give gifts, that's one's pretty difficult. Yeah, passports, entrance visa. Yeah, you got to have documents showing you're accepted into the other country. Yeah, you got to get the police to sign off. A sponsor, Marcy jumping in there. Yeah. The sponsor one is a great one for this. When we talk about the students, when I ask them, do you know anybody in another country that will vouch for you? And there's always one kid, my uncle lives in Canada. Oh, okay. Would he vouch for you though? My uncle, lives in Eastern Washington. I'm not convinced he'd vouch for me. Yeah, sponsors is a really big one. Permission. And again, Joshua, thank you. You mentioned permission. You've got to have the other country's permission to come in. And again, as a student, if you're doing this with your students, I'd encourage you to keep reminding them 1930s, Great Depression. And that's everywhere. And bureaucracies take forever. I love teaching this with seniors, and I do this with my seniors because they're in the midst of bureaucracy trying to apply for college. And if they've done FAFSA, right, and if you've interacted with that, any government, they go, oh my gosh, all of a sudden it clicks if they've had to do any sort of government form. In 1937, to what extent had the personal assets of Jews already been seized by authorities? To a very high extent, Eugene. That's a great question. A very extreme. Expropriation had happened quite a bit. So then you're really looking at, and I think that's a great question, Eugene, to bounce off the idea that you're looking at, as you look at that list, you're thinking of people who are at least middle class or above. Again, there's this assumption that all Jews were rich. They weren't. That's a stereotype. And so you're looking at the middle class and what money they have left, or what possessions or what resources they have left. And that's a really great point for students to get. Marie, you've I was wondering who was looking over all these documents. The Nazi bureaucracy. The Nazi bureaucracy was very intricate. There was always somebody wanting to be a Nazi official. Janelle, you asked, aside from FAFSA, what's another bureaucratic example relevant to some high school students? Have they ever appealed an absence, or if they've ever appealed anything? Like I use my students, if you've appealed a suspension, even in schools, driver's license is a great, the DMV is a really good example. Yeah, trying to think what else. I do mention in my class students and families that have dealt with things like applying for free and reduced lunch, applying for any sort of thing at school that is financially, even at my school, applying for their parking permit, trying to get a class waived. Absolutely. That's a really great through. Yeah. So good, thank you. Now, again, what we see in these documents is one of the things that always sticks out to me, honestly, and my students, there's usually a handful of students who pick this up, is the Nazis seem to be making it very difficult to leave. Yeah, they seem to be making it seems to counter Nazi ideology of ridding the Reich of Jews. And that's, again, one of those intricate questions that students you can sit with for a while and have a conversation about. Yes and no, they are making it very difficult. They're really making it difficult to get out of Germany with any money or any assets. Yeah. Exchanging currency, yep. Yeah. And so, yes, it seems to go counter to the Nazi ideology of they don't want the Jews in Germany, but they also don't want the Jews to take any money with them. And it feeds into the Nazi stereotype that all Jews have a bunch of money hiding somewhere. Right. And so we're going to make sure they don't get out with it. Okay. So the next one. So this is a document looking at what Jews had to do. We just talked about to get out of Germany. And as you notice, you need the police records. You need one of the other things. I don't know if anybody mentioned this because you were awesome in the chat. You need proof of booked passage to the Western Hemisphere after 1939. So to have proof of a ticket on a steamship, but you didn't know if you're going to get on the boat, right? And again, if you're a family, now, no offense to those of you that are, sans family at this point, but if you're moving you and your spouse and your children, or you and your parents, or you and your siblings, that financial burden becomes pretty heavy, yeah? Right? And it's still the Great Depression. So the next document I'd like you to look at, find all mine, is the document, the immigration document. And it looks like, yes, put that, make sure so you can see what it looks like in the folder. It looks like this. And again, I would have handed this out to my students or handed out to you if we were in class together. This is documents you need to enter the US, okay, at the time. And again, I would ask my students, just for clarity, I would say, I want you to annotate, write, draw pictures, color, highlight, engage with the document. I'm a big fan of that. And look for the 3 things, 1 or 2 things is fine as well, that you think would be the most difficult to get at the time. And I'm going to ask, I would have them, again, think about it, talk about it, share it out. I'm going to ask you to read through the document real quick and throw it in the chat. What do you think is the most difficult? And again, this is about getting into the US, what the US government wants from you. I'll give you a second to look at that. And as you're looking, and I like to talk over you, for some of our students, depending on, the makeup of your classroom, this is going to sound super familiar. They've experienced immigration. And some students will feel free and chat about that. Others don't. I never call on students, obviously, to share that experience. But for some students, they will say, hey, this is what we went through. And this can be a real place where they can connect in their own experiences. So when you find a couple things that are intriguing, oh, there we go. Yeah, blowing up the chat. 2 sponsors. Yeah, that 2 sponsors thing. I really like to ask my students, who do you know in another country that will vouch for you? Proof of permission to leave, which Germany wanted you to have proof of permission to enter. So I don't know how you get those at the same time. Yeah. Certificate of good conduct. I'm not completely convinced I could get that. Military record, or yeah. And again, for those of you specifically, if you're teaching like US history and using this is a great conversation about the overall immigration process in the 1920s and 30s and the quota system and a connection to it today. It really weaves into that very, very well. The physical exam, Rebecca, thank you for throwing that up. That was one that I was going to hit upon. That means you have to go to a US consulate and get the physical exam. That means an appointment. That means getting the whole, if it's just you, getting yourself there, if it's you and multiple family members, getting them there. And again, in Berlin, you have to be in Berlin to do that. You have to get an appointment. And assuming in the 1930s, when people are trying to get out of Europe, specifically get out of Germany, there's probably not a lot of appointments. Yes, Cody, thank you. Yes, it all sounds pretty difficult. You also have to speak English to a certain degree. One of the things I always know, I teach a law civics course as well. All of our government documents in the United States are written in a high level English that most of us have trouble attaining to, which is a whole different access issue, and they always have been. So you don't only have to speak and read English, you have to have an academic understanding for a lot of our government documents. Again, some of your older students will understand that as they try to weave their way through documents as adults. Yeah, are there people who testify on behalf of the Jews? Yeah, absolutely. And we know that post-Kristallnacht, many Jewish men were put into concentration camps. That's going to show up on their police record. The Americans don't care why. The Kindertransports, the Kindertransports went to England, so their rules would have been different, and they agreed to accept. There wasn't the Rogers-Wagner Act. Did I say that in the right order? I always get them messed up. The Rogers-Wagner Act tried to pass in the United States to do something similar with Kindertransport to bring children to the United States. It never got out of Congress because basically FDR said he wouldn't sign it. It's politically not expedient for him. Students really like to learn about that one as well. So the Kindertransport, if I'm answering that well for you, Rebecca, that was an agreement between the governments, between the German government, the Nazi government, and the English government to accept those children. So yeah, you look at that and you realize how difficult we made it, and that we had quotas. And we know that after the Anschluss, the Nazis takeover of Austria, that our quotas for Germans now included Austrians, making it twice as difficult. You could do a whole study, and there's lots of lessons out there as well, on the anti-Semitism in the American government at the time, and the forces working to keep Jews out. I would highlight lessons on the Evian conference in the St. Louis, and to kind of go deeper on this. But you can see that this wasn't an easy thing, and I think that students need to see that. I think that's important for them to see. How am I doing on time? I'm trying to see the question. So many, yeah. How many? I don't know the numbers off the top. Yeah, the St. Louis is good when teaching. It's a really good crossover. Mary, I'm not sure the total number of Jews that got into the United States, 33 to 45. I know there were 1,000 refugees kept at the refugee camp in Oswego, New York, but they weren't allowed to stay. Paul or Alana, do you know total numbers that got into the U.S.? Off the top of my head.
I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, It's on the USHMM website, and there's actually that map, that immigration map probably shows the number. But people did.
I'll see if I can find the link and I'll post it.
Oh, thank you, Alana. People did get in. I might actually have it on the slide. I say that now. But not as many has wanted to, for sure. So at this point, I'm not going to show it. See, this is adapting. Another great resource that I would show in my class at this point is The Path to Nazi Genocide. And I don't know if you're familiar with this film. This is a film that the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum put out a couple years ago. It's phenomenal. It streams for free. It's on the USHMM website. It's on YouTube. Phenomenal film that really contextualizes the whole Holocaust. I will say, depending on your age group, there are parts of this that may not be appropriate for middle school. It's really geared to high school and above. So I always preview it, know your students, you know them best, but I like to kind of give that warning. At this point, I would show a 10-minute clip from this. This is broken down into chapters on Citizens to Outcasts, which kind of talks the story of what's happening to the Jews in Germany. We're short on time, and so I want to honor my commitment to time. So I'm not going to show that because I do want to do some working with journals. I'm checking the chat here, sorry. Yeah, Anne Frank's family tried to get him. Yeah, I know, Paul, I think you're right. I think we did get a huge group, statistically more than other groups, but absolutely. The next thing I'm going to ask you to look for, and I know I have it up, so let me make sure I have, there we go, is in your documents. Too many things going on here now. Sorry. I'm still screen sharing. Sorry. I'm out of practice. It's been 2 weeks. I'm out of practice. In the documents, if you'll open up Klaus Langer's journal from Salvage Pages. This is, again, from the book Salvage Pages. This is a compilation of student diary, or not student, excuse me, teenage diaries from the Holocaust. Marcy, you brought up Anne Frank's, probably the most famous diarist. These are other diarists that that have been compiled by Alexander Zapruder. This is a phenomenal text for both history classes and ELA classes. I can't recommend this text enough in terms of Salvage Pages, in terms of getting student voice, or getting the voice of the young people and the voice of victims and survivors. Klaus survived. I think he made it to Palestine and eventually the United States. Yes. So what I'm going to do, and this is what I would do in class, I'm going to do it now because, you know, why not? It's summer and we're going to do this. I would popcorn this. And what I'm going to ask you to do, and if you had the document, again, I love engaging. I would have students note what Klaus mentions about leaving Germany, what information he gives about leaving, and then what information he gives about other countries, trying to get to other countries. Klaus is a teenager, so he's a little bit older. I also ask my students to count how many countries Klaus mentions, because there's quite a few. I have them circle it. They always miss one, but that's okay. So I'm going to ask you guys, because I've been talking, and I'm just going to ask you to popcorn it. So if I could get someone to unmute, this is risky because you could all just be like, no, just like my students would. So somebody unmute and read one of the directions. So starting with November 28th, someone read that, and then someone jump into December, et cetera, et cetera. That would be amazing and not make me look silly. So will someone jump on and do that for us?
Are you going to share screen, Branda, or are you?
I can. I thought do I need to? People should have it. Do you want me to share screen? I can do that.
Might make it uniform that way. And if that's the case, then I'm happy to read the first paragraph.
Thank you. What's going on here? What did I do? Hold please. I'm not sharing.
Just to start before you share.
Say that again.
Did you want somebody to just jump in and start right now?
Go for it.
November 28th, 1938. On November 23rd, father came home and immediately began work on the immigration process. The only two countries to which father's pension could be transferred were Chile and Palestine. By his calculation, his income would not be enough to make a living in Palestine, and the question then arose whether he would be able to supplement his pension. There was also the question whether the Nazis would continue to send his pension abroad. As an amateur musician, it was almost impossible to make a living in Palestine because of the many other Jewish musicians who had immigrated there. In Chile, the situation was somewhat better, and it would have been possible to live there on the pension. Father had to give up hope for immigrating to Argentina. He is now hoping to get a business license for Palestine. It would be best if we could all go to Palestine.
Thank you.
According to the new law, Jews are allowed to take only essentials with them when they immigrate. The new regulation requires rehabilitation to the German government for the destruction caused over Kristallnacht.
Thank you.
I'll go. Regarding the emigration of my parents, I have the following to report. First came 2 refusals from Argentina for lack of letters of credit. The rich uncle in America is unable to assume such a financial responsibility. We don't have an affidavit for the US. India requires firm employment there or a contract. Father is now trying to make connections in India to obtain a contract. He also wrote to Peru, and he was told to go to the Uruguayan consulate. Allegedly, the Dominican Republic would take 10,000 Jews and provide them with visas. However, nothing further is known about that. It probably makes no sense to turn to them. However, with a Dominican Republic visa, it is possible to get a half-year visa for Palestine. Shanghai also accepts Jews even without a visa, but it's questionable how one can live there. The mail also brought no news from Palestine. We had submitted a request for commercial certification.
My parents had all but given up hope for South America. However, India is still an open possibility. If they can get there, it would be very good. Their chances for emigrating to the US also are very slim because they have a very high waiting number, 25,000.
Regarding their immigration, my parents have not progressed one step. As of January 1st, 1939, we are required to have an identity card. In providing personal information, the official asked my father's hair color. My father is bald. I must really admire my parents. Despite having been rejected, disappointed, having suffered hardships and daily aggravations, they did not lose their good humor.
My parents finally have something that might work with regard to their emigration. A Chilean visa costs about 70 pounds, which my parents somehow have obtained. Unfortunately, all the ships for Chile are booked until December. However, that still presents a possibility. And then a month later, my parents are still trying to get papers for Chile. At the moment, it does not look good.
Thank you.
Wow.
I'll read the bottom. Klaus's parents and grandmother were not able to immigrate from Germany. His mother died of blood poisoning on September 8th, 1941 in Essen. His father was deported on April 21st, 1942 to Izbeka, I can't say it, camp in Poland. By the end of that year, the local Jews of Izbeka and those who'd come from other locations had been taken to the death camp at Belzec or Sobibor or had been shot. Klaus's father was among them. His grandmother was sent to Terezin on July 15th, 1942, and only a few months later was deported to Minsk, where she perished. Klaus emigrated to Palestine, arriving in January 1940. So did anybody catch how many countries he mentions? Throw it in there.
Just for the sake of pronunciation, it's Izbica.
Izbica, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah. I see we're getting different numbers. That happens to the students too. Yeah, I believe it's 8, but I always say that and I feel like I'm gonna find another one. what I think is interesting with the students is they even from my sophomores to my seniors realize how diverse the places are, from Chile to Shanghai to the United States to India to Palestine. Like, these people are looking everywhere. And you really get a sense from Klaus's diary entries, and his diary in Salvage Pages is much bigger. You can actually, there's a lot more of his story you get from that. But from this excerpt, you get this understanding, especially, remember, this is a teenager watching his parents go through this and documenting it. I think that's an interesting thing for our students to think about too. And again, I think something that many of our students who have, whose families have gone through many things can identify with Klaus, having sat there and watched their parents try to do what's best for their families. I know that's a real thing. You can have them annotate on a map, absolutely. You can. I usually just have them annotate the document, but absolutely, you could have them on the map if you wanted to. And they could do it independently too if you didn't want to read it out loud. I like having the students read out loud. I appreciate all of you that stepped in. I know a couple of you tried to jump in as well. And I appreciate that because I know it's summer and we're on Zoom, but I appreciate that. Yeah, so you could have them do it on map, absolutely, or have them just then map it out. If you wanted to extend it, that's a great extension. Give them a map and say, you and a partner draw this out. And it works for geography if you want to throw in another standard there. So I will say, I like to share this, that this Salvage Pages was actually a number of years ago turned into a documentary by none other than MTV. They made a documentary using Salvage Pages called I'm Still Here, where they had, and you can kind of see from the grainy picture, they had the diaries narrated by some Hollywood stars, and they tell the story, and Klaus's story is in there. And if you had this film, or this is, Alana, is this film still in the trunk?
Well, we actually don't have films in the trunk anymore since nobody has DVD players. But I think you can still find a link to it on YouTube, or you can find it online and watch it in various places. It's still one of my favorite films, even though it's now kind of on the older side.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites too. It's a whole class period, about 45 to 50 minutes. And really, you get to know some of the diarists really well. It's on, you can find it online, but you could, if you wanted, show a clip about Klaus, if the students wanted to, or just another good resource for you related to the text. And then, of course, Alexander Zapruder's book, Salvage Pages, which is an incredible text. I did have the map, Alana. Look, I did have the map in here. This is the map from USHMM that shows, and I like to show my students this map to have the conversation about, visualizing how far we're talking about. And that some of the Jews were able to go. We know that, I think someone mentioned in the chat, that South America had a lot more liberal immigration requirements during this time. Oh, look, you guys found it. See, teachers are the best. They were accepting more immigrants, but that is also true that they also accepted a lot more Nazis after the war. So it's a complicated construct. It's fun to talk about Shanghai and why they would go to Shanghai, and then of course Palestine and what is now present-day Israel. So
young people in the film you're about to watch were much the same.
Did I start that? No. Somebody else might start. I was like, did I find that? So there you have, this is the lesson that I do in class, because I do it as a one-day lesson. Like I said, I promised that I would show you they've updated it, which also means it's difficult to find the documents we've given you. Am I screen sharing the website right now? Or no? Yeah, thank you. And here's a link. Thank you to this. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is updating a ton of its lesson plans. So they've kind of updated it and called it Challenges of Escape. It's a really great lesson. It's a little bigger. You're going to use Klaus's diary, which I like the use of the diaries. I like them hearing the voice of people experiencing it at the time. It's just a little bit different lesson than what you saw me give. Both I think are valuable. That one, the new updated one's about a 90-minute lesson, so it may or may not fit in your class. And I think having both resources is really important. So that's my presentation. Again, you can extend this further depending on what you're teaching, but I think this is a great way to deal with one of those complex questions of why Jews didn't just leave when things got bad. Are there any questions besides the amazing ones you guys have already asked? By the way, Alana, I'm done 2 minutes early.
Branda,
Great timing,
Leonora asked,
Branda.
yeah, Leonora asked a question that I was starting to type into chat, but maybe you can weigh in yourself and I can add to it if necessary. She asked about is Salvage Pages and or the film, I'm Still Here, usable at middle school? What grades are we talking about? What do you think? And then I can weigh in if you'd like to.
I think there's tons of stuff in Salvage Pages that is usable at middle school and high school and college. I think it depends on what you're studying. There's Klaus's diary, I think, could be used in middle school. There's nothing that I think. Now I only teach high school, so you'd have to kind of monitor that yourself. And there are diaries of like Yitzhak Rudashevsky, who's one of my favorites, is a young man, and his diary could be used definitely at a middle school, talking about the stuff that he does there. But there's also the diary of the anonymous girl who deals with being starvation and some of those things. So yes, and Salvage Pages is a very thick book with lots of diaries in it. If you Google Salvage, well, Paul, is there lessons for Salvage Pages on our website?
There's a link and reference over to Salvage Pages,
Yeah.
and therefore teachers would understand and be able to access those resources from Facing History. And like you say, Branda, I mean, that's you really are focusing on excerpts there. I mean, the diary entries are pretty dense, and some of them go off into tangents, and some of them are very, very dark, especially for middle school. So, if anyone's interested in talking about it further or recommendations, Branda and or I are very happy to talk with you, and so feel free to email.
And I will say that on if you Google Salvage Pages on Alexander's website, she has actually broken some of them down and segmented them for you, so you could look and see if it fits, because they are there. Each diarist has an intro which gives you the background, which would be more for you as a teacher. Like there's a deeper intro to Klaus than what we gave, and then the diary entries. So yes, I think it would be, and we've had Alexander here before for Powell, I believe, for the Powell Fellowship a couple times. She's phenomenal, and hopefully we'll get her back in. So yes, let me see if I want to see if there's.
Well, I think, Branda, maybe we should wrap it up there. But if people continue to have questions, or if there's other things that you want, please feel free to email any of us. We're happy to continue the conversation. You can join us later this afternoon. I know there's so much to be taken from this presentation, and Branda, like the resources are awesome, and you really showed like how you can go off into 100 different directions on this topic. Thank you everybody for participating in this session. If you look in the chat, you will find a link to the evaluation form. Fill out the evaluation when you're done for the day, because it'll ask you which sessions you attended. There's also a link to PD Enroller if you are registering for clock hours for these sessions. And I'm going to put a link in the chat right now for you all to join us at noon for our Lunch and Learn session with Kendall Pinkney. It's going to be a really great program, and then we have some discussion following up after that, which we can discuss the Lunch and Learn or anything you've heard in these discussions if you want. So with that, I hope to see you all at 12. Thank you so much, Branda, and thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you all.
Look forward to seeing you later in the afternoon.
Good luck.
Bye, everyone.